وقل رب زدني علما.
The distinction here needs to be made between what the brother is saying about what Christian Orthodox belief is, as opposed to what the scriptures actually say. Now, if, for example, the brother talks about two natures, the first point of call, logically speaking, would be to go to the source itself and see what the source says. Yeah? The source.
The source.
Yeah.
Right.
So obviously, I mean, it doesn't make sense that we develop a whole idea and not base it on the source itself. So I would actually consider this as one perspective that, okay, if we said that there are two natures of a human being, in this instance Jesus Christ,
That's what,
the Christian Orthodox understand.
but not Coptic Christians, right? Coptic Christians are slightly different.
Yeah. But if that is the case, then the first thing I would want to do is, okay, let's go to the source. Does the source have anything specific in relation to this idea? Do we have anything?
Yes, because confusingly, the Bible teaches that speaks of Jesus as a man. He prays, he eats, he at one stage he has regrets, he does all the things that a man does, but he also has the attributes of God.
I'm sorry, I'm Shabir Yusuf.
Lionel.
Nice meeting you, Lionel. But I
So
can
that's
agree
why
that-
that's why it's confusing. It is.
I understand what you mean, but if we take it from that perspective, like I just said, and I use the word specifically, if I were to look at the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, I would want to see a specific statement which clarifies this two natures idea.
See, the thing is, though, that the Bible was written by the Bible. Even like non-believer scholars, right, would say that probably the earliest book in the Bible is something like. They think maybe Kings or Samuel, but in any event, it was written over about 1,000 years by different people. When the first books were written, the Jews hadn't been exposed to Greek culture at all. By the time the last books were written, you had a very, very different culture. It's different from the Quran, which, whatever you believe about its ultimate authorship, we know was written in the space of about 20, 30 years, right? So, in other words, that's why it's more coherent, because it was written in the space of 20, 30 years. The Bible was written over about 1,000 years by people who started off not being exposed to Hellenistic culture. By the end of it, they've been exposed to Persian Zoroastrian culture and Hellenistic culture as well. So there's a development of ideas in there. So it is a more difficult book to kind of like derive a single message from.
I can actually agree with that view. However, again, like I said, if there is a believer, and he has a perspective, that perspective ought to be initially based on the source material itself. Now, the way I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, if I agree with you...
Become a libertarian.
May I? I'll have a look at it.
This is what you need to be, libertarian.
Right. We'll go next to that. Give him a copy of commercial.
I've got one. Mohammed Marmaduke Pictures translation.
But as I was saying, brother, you see,
I'm saying Mohammed Marmaduke.
I would want to look at the source, and
yeah, he was English. Yeah.
You know, when you said that there was a development, an evolution of thought, and how it influenced the Bible, that is the suggestion being made. Now, the question is this: if there were influences, and those influences somehow crept into this particular book, one would now have to decipher exactly what was revealed. Or
it's confusing because you live in a Protestant country. Because Protestants have a slightly different. The Bible, imagine I've got a Bible here. The Bible isn't what's called a flat book.
You like one?
No, I've got plenty. Don't worry. It's not like a flat book. So in other words, you don't start at the beginning and then get to the end and say, what does it mean? to a Jew, the Old Testament is like a fat book. But to a Christian, you've got an Old Testament and a New Testament. And as Paul himself says in his epistles, there are things to a Christian that are hidden in the Old Testament. So St. Augustine, St. Augustine, he said the new is hidden in the old, and the old is revealed in the new. So the way a Christian should read the Bible is they should read the New Testament, then the Old Testament, and a Christian interpretation of the Old Testament, as opposed to, say, a Jewish or an Islamic, is precisely that. It's interpreted using what's called a hermeneutical screen of the New Testament. Right? So at the end of the day, that means that you have something written in the Old Testament that, to all intents and purposes, seems to be saying A, but a Christian will say it says B, and the reason they'll say it says B is because there's a comment in the New Testament that says that.
Yes, that's understandable. However, if we are looking at the source and somebody is going to suggest to us that, look, there may be something that is hidden which is not apparent. It may become apparent later. Understood. But if we are going to take specific statements, as you were discussing about John 1:1 also, I would suggest that for two natures to be made apparent, something specific has to have been mentioned. Now we know from the conversation so far that there isn't anything specific. If there was, there wouldn't be a conversation.
Yeah, but you see, to some extent, I think again it's because you are yourself a Muslim, presumably, and you live in a Protestant culture. Now, see, Orthodox Christianity is not a religion of the book in the same. Because the Bible itself was only actually canonized over a period of time. It took 300 or 400 years, and to this day there was never a formal canonical list. So, for example, there are certain churches in the East that don't recognize the Book of Revelation, for example. So, but what if you actually read Timothy, for example, then what the Bible, the New Testament actually teaches is that Jesus founded the church based upon the 12 apostles, and actually authority resides in the church, and the Bible is a part of that authority. But there's nothing in, just to finish, there's nothing in Orthodox Christianity that says that you can only believe something explicitly taught in the Bible. What it says is you can't believe anything that contradicts the Bible, and that's a different thing.
I entirely agree with you. But when you make a distinction between the church and the source, my question
But the source is Jesus, not the Bible, right?
I still initially would contend which one ought to come first, the source or the church?
Well, the way I look at it is that as a Christian, I don't believe in the Bible, I believe in Jesus.
Right, so are you a Christian?
Am I a Christian? Of sorts,
earlier on you said, well, I'm not necessarily
the guy standing here preaching the gospel probably would say I'm not a Christian.
He might not identify.
I'm not I'm kind of like a Sufi Muslim.
So who do you believe?
Whatever that is.
Don't give me a hard time, but I'm kind of like.
They still look at the Quran. Your Christianity.
Oh, I look at the Bible. Of course I look at the Bible.
In your belief, who you think Jesus was? What do you believe?
What do I think Jesus was? I think Jesus was God's Son. I do. Because Jesus rose. At the end of the day, what makes me a Christian ultimately isn't that I believe something in the 4th chapter of Genesis or something like that. It's that I believe Jesus rose from the dead. That's what makes me a Christian. So I believe Jesus rose from the dead, and I don't believe Muhammad did, and I don't believe Moses
And
did.
you think Jesus was the Son of God?
Yeah, Moses is come back in Jesus' name.
Jesus was Son of God in and of itself doesn't mean anything special. Anybody calling someone a son of God. So, for example, the Old Testament calls angels sons of God, right? So, in and of itself, it doesn't mean anything special. But Jesus was Christ, and Christ is Greek for the Messiah. So to me, the New Testament reveals something the Old Testament didn't reveal. The Old Testament said that the Messiah is going to come, and then in the New Testament we find out that in some way that is difficult to understand, I acknowledge, that the Messiah is in fact a hypostasis is the Greek word. It's a particular personality in the Godhead himself.
So do you believe in the Trinity?
Sorry, brother, can I just ask, when you talk about the hypostatic union, what reference would you be able to, off the top of your head, quote, which justifies that?
Well, there isn't one specifically.
Right. So is it a church?
Perhaps maybe in John's Gospel where Jesus says, the Father is greater than I, but I and the Father are one, or I'm in the Father in me, and stuff like that.
You know the statement, and it's a common one that we discuss. When you say I and my Father in one, what do you take out of that?
When I what, sorry?
You know the verse that you just mentioned, I and the Father are one.
Yeah.
What do you make of that?
Well, it's interesting because Jesus then goes on to say, I and the Father are one, just as you and I are one. Right? So you could argue
No,
that...
only verse...
hang on, but no, I am answering your question, in fact, and I'm actually dealing with what I presume is going to
I
be
could
the
answer
thing.
that question.
So, do you want to answer it? Listen,
When you say I am a Father one, God is a spirit and He is a spirit too.
yeah, but Jesus
That is
also
not-
says...
Yes.
Jesus was not this, he was a
Jesus
man
also-
walking.
but the unity that Jesus claims for his relationship with God, he also attributes to his relationship with the apostles.
Exactly.
So it could just be a unity of
Purpose.
But do you not think...
of purpose.
One in
Right.
purpose.
Sorry, do you not think that perhaps if you looked at that statement, it might clarify what it ought to be meaning? Don't you think?
No, because you see, I think that if you read some of the other epistles, when Jesus said, "Before God was, I am," you know why that's really.
No, he didn't say that.
Before
Abraham.
No, he said before Abraham
Oh, okay. Before Abraham was, I am.
Okay, now.
The reason why that's
didn't he say-
important is because why does Jesus say, "I am"? Why was that important?
But why didn't he say before Adam was I am?
Well, because-
Why did he say
made
Abraham?
But it doesn't matter. The point
Actually, can I
is.
just say, I think this is just diverting. If we can just restrict ourselves to that, maybe
Hypostatic
we can have a
union.
clearer understanding of what he meant when he said before Abraham was I am.
Yeah.
At least that is my contention.
So in the Old Testament, you know Yahweh, right? The word that Jews don't say it, right? They leave out the vowels and they use it. So that most scholars think that that's Hebrew for something like "I am that I am" or "I am as I am." So most Christians tend to believe that Jesus was specifically referring to God's own personal name that he gave to Moses, Yahweh, which means "I am that I am." When he said, "Before Abraham was, I am." So what they believe is that he was saying two things. One, that he pre-existed. In other words, he wasn't just a man. And two, that he had a special identity or unity with God, because he uses the same expression that God uses when he gives his own name to Moses.
Can I just respond to that? Actually, brother, you might have got it slightly misunderstood here. Because what you are talking about is contained in the Old Testament, in Exodus. The words actually used, they were Ahya, Asher, Ahya.
Right.
Whereas you are talking about Yahweh.
Yeah.
Now, if I were to turn this and say, okay, if we were to look at a particular statement of Jesus Christ as an example, when he said about what the Creator is, what is the greatest commandment?
Yeah.
What is it?
He actually refers to the Deuteronomy 16, I think it is,
6:4, yes.
which is what the Jews say every day. Hear, Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one.
Now, if I were to say this,
And it's not the Lord your God with your heart, mind,
Yeah.
soul, and strength,
But-
and your neighbour is yourself.
right, but if we are looking at the word Yahweh, if we can just switch slightly to the way it is understood, so you have them saying Shema Israel, Adonai Elohenu, Adonai Echad.
Yeah.
Now, if I were to take this and I say it's saying Yahweh, Yahuwah, Elo, Yahuwah, Echad, what would that say to you? Is that talking about a being with more than one nature? Is it? Do you think?
No, not that particular passage.
No, it isn't.
I don't think
But
it
now,
is. No.
if you were to take that,
But the problem we have is we have to. The problem. Can I just borrow your mic just for a second? The problem that we have is we have to reconcile all these other statements. So, for example, an important one is. Thank you. So the New Testament. So Hebrews and also John and also Colossians teach quite clearly that God made the universe through Jesus,
right. But if we were to say, for example,
or through the Son of God.
right. If I were to follow that reasoning and I tell you, okay, if we take it from Genesis to Revelation and we approach it from the common perspective of how the Creator ought to be understood. So, for example, if we take the Old Testament, yes, in the Old Testament,
As I
is
say, you
there
can keep
any
it, if you
idea
want
of a
it.
triune
None whatsoever.
There isn't. If we look at the verse that you quoted, and I'm just going back to that.
The Christian teaching of the Trinity completely contradicts the Jewish revelation of God.
Right. Now, that's a
That's
start.
why. No, but
I agree with
like
you.
I said, I am not a conventional
Of
Christian.
course, I appreciate that.
And that's
Look,
why
let's
I,
look
you
at
know what
the
Unitarians are?
Yes.
I used to be a Unitarian, right?
What's in your mind then?
Because the New Testament clearly contradicts that teaching.
Right.
You
Okay,
see,
let's
as
see.
far as you can only really be, I mean, to be honest with you, you could only only believe that Jesus wasn't God if you reject the New Testament. I'm not going to do
Right,
that.
I understand. But what if you can accept the New Testament, except look at it the way it was intended?
No, because I don't think it was intended the way
Right,
you
okay.
say.
How do you know? I haven't even said it.
Because because you think it was intended to believe in a Unitarian.
No,
way.
I don't think
Well,
that.
what do you believe?
I said, and like I started off with, if we were to look at the source and the evidence and consider the evidence for what the evidence is, rather than superimposing a particular thought.
I don't think I'm doing that.
No, I didn't accuse you of that. I'm
No,
just
but
saying that
I
is what
really
we
don't,
ought to
because
do.
I actually, to
I
me, it would
accept.
make more sense
Yeah.
if it was Unitarian.
Right. All right, it would make more sense if it was Unitarian, but according to the evidence, you think it isn't.
I think that the evidence of, for it, not just of the New Testament itself, but the evidence of comments made, for example, the earliest comments we have about the Christians, like the comment that Suetonius made
Yes.
about the Christians worship Jesus as God.
Yes.
Right? The comments about how the Christians eat their God, referring to the Mass, right? So all the evidence is that Christians did actually believe that Jesus was God in the first century.
But do you not think that you are actually accepting the notion that you yourself mentioned, that if, for example, there were a culture in which the idea of gods being eaten, gods fighting, etc., impinged on the very understanding that you are relying on?
No, I don't think that. To me, it's about authenticity. So I'm perfectly free to say I don't believe Jesus was God, but I can't say the New Testament doesn't teach Jesus was God, because in me, if you actually allow the text to speak for itself, and if you look at it in the context of other comments that are made as well, I think it's clear the Christians just did believe that Jesus was God.
Yeah, I can see that. But now what I am saying is exactly what I'm trying to, the approach I'm trying to take is, for example, I and my Father are one. Now, is it in any way suggesting some form of unity with the Creator?
Let's read that.
Yeah?
Is it suggesting?
Is it suggesting some
Let's
form
read
of
that
unity
verse.
with the
Let's see who they
Creator?
worship.
Not in that. Not just in that verse. No.
But isn't it explained?
But what you have to understand is that the same gospel, in its first few verses, teaches that God made the universe through whoever Jesus was before he became man Jesus.
Right, okay.
And that's
now,
quite a big thing to do, right? So when you have a man, and so far John's told us this man pre-existed. In the pre-existence he was called the Word of God. He was in the beginning with God, and everything that was made through him. And then he comes along and says, if you have seen me, you have seen the Father. No one else has seen the Father except for me, because I come from the Father, and I and the Father are one. Then it's about evidence building up, right?
Absolutely. But now, if I were to take you to the very point that you made and say John 1:1 that you're referring to.
Yeah.
Okay. The words used there, are they, I'm going to use this as it is commonly understood. In the Greek that is used, what are the words used there?
For what?
For God.
It's hoi theo.
And the second one?
The second one is that one, I think. Well, the second one doesn't have a hoi in front of it.
It doesn't, does
Yeah.
it? What distinction is it making?
Well, this is what the Jehovah's Witnesses claim, right?
No,
So the
forget the
Jehovah's
Jehovah's
Witnesses.
Witnesses. What do we
No,
think?
well, I won't, because that they actually have their own version of the Bible based upon that, and they claim that it should say, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was a God, and the Word was with God."
What is it currently?
It says, "And the Word was."
with God.
Can
And
you
the word
open
was
it? Can you
God.
open it, please? Just read John 1:1.
But you see,
So basically
but
what-
I've looked into this issue, and to me the clincher is that if you actually look at what non-believing scholars of the text say, they say that the conventional translation, the majority of them say that is the better translation.
Which one?
The current one that says, "And the Word was God."
Right, I have no problem. But like I said, I'm looking at the words themselves. You see, if there's an understanding to be derived and there's some form of confusion between the parties concerned having a discussion, then it would be advisable to go to the source. Now, if I can just...
But there's other stuff as well, friend.
Absolutely.
What did
If we
Thomas
can
say
just-
when he touched Jesus' wound?
Right, if we can just, before we go there, if
One
we can
point
just
there.
address the
Yeah, I got it.
primary points, yeah? Can I...
My
Right, sorry.
Lord, my God.
Here. In the beginning was the
Word.
and the Word was with, and the Word was,
You can see it. Yeah.
what does it say?
It says God.
Right. Now, now you see, what I asked you, what are, in Greek, what are the words that are used here?
This is hoi theo, and
what
but
is
that
that
doesn't
one?
have a hoi in front of it.
Now, what does...
So it doesn't
what
have a
is
definite article in front of it.
And what is the distinction being made there if it doesn't have the same, when
Well,
it should have this?
you obviously know a bit of an ancient language, so you know that ancient Greek is incredibly complicated.
You can read that verse.
Excellent.
Most scholars,
I'll come to that.
most scholars agree with that translation.
I have no problem. But what I am saying is that, look, if we were to look at the statements themselves, try and see if there is perhaps another understanding that can be derived from it. So, for example, I'm just going back to that one, where it says, I and my Father are one. Yeah. Now, if there was any association of divinity that Christ has with the Creator, with the Father, according to the Christian understanding, I would assume that he would want to clarify that. So,
But the question it also has to bear in mind, you see, it's about, if you're looking at a text, so the way I thought, the way it seemed to me is, you look at the New Testament, there's like 90% of things about Jesus talk about him like an ordinary man.
yes.
Then there's about 10% that talk about him as a divine being.
Yeah.
Now, you tend to need to interpret from the lower to the higher, because if I say, well, Jesus is a man and I'm going to exclude the God ones, then that's actually quite difficult. Whereas if I say, in fact, what's happening here is a gradual revelation of something, and it's easier to reconcile the man Jesus statements with the divine than the other way around. Because if Jesus was divine, he could choose to also have human attributes. But if he was purely human, then he couldn't have had divine attributes.
Right.
So it doesn't need a whole lot. And there are about 5 statements in the New Testament that would appear to unambiguously say that in some way that the church took 300 years to work out, Jesus is God.
Give me one.
Okay.
Give him that. Take that.
So let's
And the
talk
word
about,
was made flesh, or no?
So let's
Oh,
talk
you don't
about
believe
Thomas
it.
then.
Something
So let's talk
specific.
about Thomas.
The word made flesh and dwelt among us.
Okay, no problem for that.
So Thomas, when Thomas touched the wounds of the resurrected Christ, he said, "My Lord and my God."
Yeah.
No one corrected him. If Jesus had been a man, he would have corrected him sternly for his blasphemy, but he didn't.
Right.
So why didn't he correct him?
Right. Well, if that is the case, and I'm going to answer this, going back to what I was trying to address, yeah? You see, you're absolutely right. He sees the hands, the feet, and he says, my God. Yeah? But he was not there when he appeared to them in the upper room. When Christ appeared to them first, Thomas was not there, was he?
I don't know. Was he not there?
Okay, he was not there.
Right.
Okay, that is why he asked, because when Christ apparently appeared in the upper room, the disciples were all in their doldrums about the master. Yeah. And I'm quoting from Luke. Okay. When he turns up, the narration tells us that they got very terrified and affrighted because they had seen a spirit. Because he came in and just said shalom. Yeah. Now, he then says to them, he says, what is wrong with you? Yeah? Handle me and see that it is.
This one was here.
Yeah, I'll come back to that.
Philip was here.
It is I myself. For a spirit has no flesh and bones as you see me have. Okay. Now he's saying something to them, isn't he?
Phantasm, I think, is the actual word that's used.
Yeah. What is he saying to them though?
What is he saying?
Yes. When he turns up and he says, look, why are you terrified? Why are you afraid? And the verse actually says, because they supposed that they had seen a spirit. So he says to them, handle me and see. If I can just finish, maybe.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, not to worry.
No, carry on.
So he says, handle me and see.
Underestimating God.
For a spirit has
Don't
no flesh and
underestimate
bones
God.
as you see me have.
Yeah.
They were then overjoyed, and he turns and says something very strange. He says, have you here a broiled fish and
Anything to
honeycomb?
eat.
Something to eat. Now, question is, if I go back to what I had been trying to get to, the verse, I and my Father are one. Okay, the association of divinity is what we are addressing. You know, as you said, start from the high, go to the low. But I would suggest, but I would suggest that shouldn't you actually look at what the very individual we are discussing has to say about it? I would suggest that is a reasonable thing to do. So, if, for example, he said, I and my Father are one, I would ask you, what happened next in that particular segment of the New Testament? Are you familiar with it? What happened next? Right. Basically, it starts at verse 23. It's in John chapter 10, where he comes and they ask him, if you are the Christ, tell us plainly. And he goes on to tell them, my sheep hear my voice, on and on. Then he says, no one can pluck them out of my hands, no one can pluck them out of my Father's hands. I and my Father are one.
Right.
Now, there's an immediate association of divinity, because that is what my Christian friends tell me. I said, well, no, let's go a bit further. What happens next? Well, the next verse, yes, they pick up stones to stone him.
Yeah.
Now, why?
Yeah. Because by calling himself God's son, he's made himself equal with God.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is what the charge is.
Yeah.
So you know what happens next? Verse 32, he says, many a good works have I shown you. For which of the good works do you want to stone me? Now, just think about this. Lionel, let's think about this. He has made a statement. They have picked up stones to stone him. He looks at them wanting to stone him. And he turns around and says to them, many a good works have I shown you from the Father. For which of the good works do you stone me? What is the association between his statement and them picking up stones and him thinking it's for good works?
Well, why would he not just reject their interpretation of what he said?
Excellent. But that's not the question. The question is, he said, I and my Father... I know what you mean. He said, I and my Father are one. They pick up stones. He says to them, many a good works have I shown you. Now, if I can just... It does necessarily mean, from what I'm reading, that he never made the association about the I and my Father are one with them picking up stones. However, the next verse, they respond to him. They say, we are not going to stone you for a good work, but for blasphemy. Now, what is blasphemy?
I know
When you
blasphemy
talk
is.
against God,
You know what it is?
Well, different religions have different ideas.
No, let's stick to Christianity. What is blasphemy?
Well, this was Judaism, wasn't it?
you're
Wasn't Christianity, was it? So a Jew and a Muslim would both regard blasphemy as being, well, amongst
And what
other
would a
things,
Christian think?
making yourself one with God, or equal with God.
Association with God.
Yeah.
Now, isn't that the charge that they've just put against him?
Gods.
Now, he said, I and my Father are one. They picked up stones. He clarifies to them, I do many good works. Why are you stoning me? They say, not for a good works we are stoning you. We stone you for blasphemy. For after being a man, you make yourself a... Is that true?
Is what true?
What that statement says when the Jews said it.
Well, Jesus was very obtuse, wasn't he? He taught in parables, and he actually said things in such a way that people who didn't have faith wouldn't understand what he was saying.
I agree. But do you agree with what they said?
No.
You don't?
No.
Okay.
I agree with, because at the end of the day, you see, a Christian is someone who has to believe that Judaism wasn't complete.
Okay.
The revelation of God
Yeah.
wasn't complete until Jesus came, and there were aspects of that revelation that were not given to the Jews.
I can agree with that, but Lila, you see, the next verse actually explains it for you. Because in the next verse, he said...
I say he is the Son of God.
What he's saying is,
That's why I say he's the Son of God.
before
I'll come to that.
Jesus,
He comes-
everybody was wrong. That's what you said, isn't it?
if we can just carry on, sorry. Yeah? He says, when they said to him, for a good works we stone you, not, but for blasphemy. For after being a man, you make yourself a god. He then turns to them and said, is it not written in your law? I said, ye are gods. What did
Referring
he mean?
to one of the Psalms. Yeah.
But what did he mean? Why did he not just say, of course I am?
Because he wasn't obtuse like that. That wasn't the only time he said that.
Now, if you are going to tell me...
It's like when Pilate said to him, are you the king of the Jews? He said, you have said it, you say that I am, whatever. I mean,
he
that's
said
just the
that.
way he spoke,
He said
right?
that, but if you go across the four Gospels, he says, it is as you say. Yeah? The question is this. If he is making a statement, and now he's making it clear to them, like I would say to you, you are right. Take from the top, go downward. But if something is clear, and then you make it a confusion, the problem is not with the text, the problem is with the receiver. So, for example, when Christ says to them, many a good works I've shown you, why are you stoning me? So it is clear from the statement that he is not associating his statement of I and my Father are one with them picking up stones. So, question then next is, when they accuse him of blasphemy, as a person who accepts that Christ had two natures, is possibly God the Son.
Who's me?
Possibly. No, I said if a person believes.
Yeah.
Yes? Then necessarily, when they put that accusation to him, Christ Jesus, if he was a truthful individual, would have said, actually, yes, I am.
Well,
He didn't.
yeah, sure.
No, you cannot. Of course you can. Of course you can. Richard,
No jumping.
I'm sorry, could perhaps what is going on in this verse be that Jesus has made a claim of divinity by saying, I and the Father are one? Typically, I don't actually go to that passage. But
his
let's
time
say,
zoned he is.
But let's say that's what's
I
going
landed
on.
from Australia this morning.
Welcome
Oh, I do.
I'm from here.
Sorry, I don't want to.
Welcome back to the UK.
No, I'm good. You
Yeah,
carry
right,
on.
okay. Yeah, sorry,
I'm
Richard.
trying to stay awake.
So could it be the case that he is actually claiming to be God by saying, I and the Father are one, and then when he says, for what works do you stone me? Is his point there, look, I'm doing these good works, how can you condemn what I'm doing? If you agree I'm doing good by the power of God, should you not at least consider my claim?
Right.
Is that a possible interpretation
There
of
is.
this passage?
There is a possibility there. I agree with you. But if you go back to verse 23, 24, 25, he actually tells them, many good works have I shown you. Yes? My sheep hear me. My sheep follow me. The narrative continuously is talking about what? Good works. So when he does make the statement, look, it's quite logical. No one can pluck them out of my Father's hand. Yeah? What do we have in 5:30? I can of my own self do nothing. As I hear, I judge, and my judgment is just, because I seek not my will, but the will of him that sent me. Yes? He is saying, look, if the Creator has given me followers and they are listening to me, no one can take them out of my hands. No one can pluck them out of my Father's hands. I and my Father are one. Now, up to there, the possibility that you have raised, up to there, Jesus Christ is talking to them and is telling them about the good works that he had been doing and how the association with his disciples was being described. He then makes that statement, they pick up stones to stone him. The question that you have raised here needs to be addressed there at that point. When they picked up stones,
Sorry, remind me the chapter, John.
John chapter 10, verse
Yes,
31.
Carry on.
Yeah, he says, I and my Father are one. The next verse, they pick up stones to stone him. Now, why does Jesus, according to the narrative, why does he say to them, many good works have I shown you from my Father? For which of the good works do you want to stone me? Now, question. The narrative from verse 23 is clear that he talks about good works, his association with good works and nobody being plucked out of his hands or the Father's hand. Then he says, I and my Father are one. They pick up stones. He says, many good works have I shown you. For which of the good works do you stone me? They say, no, it's not for the good works, but for blasphemy. What was the blasphemy?
Claiming to be one with the Father.
No, he
According to them.
claimed that he is the Son of God. He claimed that he's the Son of God.
According
mere
to the
man.
text, we have to look at the text and what the
Yeah,
text says.
for making yourself God, which I presume is a reference back to verse 30, at least verse 30.
It has to be.
Isaiah 1.
It has to be, otherwise we are going to accuse them of suddenly adding something in which
Right,
wasn't.
so I think that's
So
what
the
they're
narrative is a logical one. So he says to them, many good works do I stone.
Lionel, you've
many
just
good
come
works-
back from
Yeah,
Australia.
Australia.
How come
Many
you are
good
feeling
works have I done. For which of good works do you stone me? They say, we stone you not for a good works, but for blasphemy. For after being a man, you make yourself what?
Make yourself
Like
as
unto
God,
what?
yes.
Now what does that mean?
To claim to be the divine.
Totally divine, partially divine, miniaturely divine, no divine.
I'm not sure what concept
Excellent.
of deity was going
I
on
agree.
in his
But
mind.
absolutely. But I'm so glad you said it. As he said, the Jewish mind. Yeah. Now the association with the Creator of any kind, and they will consider it to be blasphemy, or as a general rule. Am I correct?
The nature of Jewish
Yes.
monotheism and what we consider to be divine is,
Yes.
is a complex subject.
Absolutely. But having said that, now we have Jesus Christ respond. My question always has been, as we were discussing it with my brother here, Lionel, if Jesus was true to himself and was a truthful man, what would he have said when they
So there are two,
associated divinity with him, what should he have said?
There are two points I want to make here. One actually, which, Lionel made very well, which is actually in the Gospel. We do not always see Jesus being crystal clear. He does speak in parables. He does hide himself from those who are hard of heart.
That's the quote from Isaiah.
Yes, exactly. But I would also say, I think the point, I still stand by my original point, which is he's not necessarily denying that he and the Father are one or that he is God, but he may be trying to say, look at what I'm doing, look at my good works. Do I seem like a bad man? Do I seem like a lunatic or a demon possessed? You see that the good works I bear witness to the fact that God is working in me. So why won't you consider my claim?
Yeah.
So I think basically he may well be claiming I am divine, yes, as I've just claimed. But why aren't you considering my evidence?
I can agree with you. But can I
used a similar kind of approach when he healed the man on the Sabbath as well.
Yes, absolutely. But here is again, I'm glad you picked that up. Yeah, you see, if I were to take your view and ask you this, on a general level, starting from Genesis up to the New Testament, okay, was there any human being who was associated with God?